My brother Mark raised his glass and smiled wide. Backyard lights hummed above folding tables and plastic chairs. They laughed again. Louder this time. "Where's your wife?" Mark said, loud for the block. Music dropped to a low murmur from the speaker. People faced me and waited for a reaction. One day, this yard would be mine. My wife Jessica stood at the bar by the fence. She was close to Mark's shoulder and laughed once. She didn't look at me when heads turned. Jessica lifted her cup and laughed again calmly. Her laugh cut deeper than any words here. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Phones lifted on the steps and screens blinked recording. Cousin Pete repeated the line for late arrivals. Another cousin mouthed my name like a punchline. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody cared either. Aunt Linda passed glass tumblers to Mark's closest friends. She handed me a cloudy plastic cup instead. Scratches circled the rim and felt rough, cheap. Ice cracked and floated near the cloudy wall. Aunt Linda said glassware was for guests near speakers. I set my paper plate on the cooler lid. Next to it sat a greasy McDonald's bag. Ketchup ran across the rim and stained fingers. I wrote the time along the edge with pen. I wrote Mark's exact words on the plate. My father David adjusted his cap and watched the grill. Guests looked at David, waiting for something clear. "Say something, this is your son," Mike said. David scraped ash into a tray and paused. He stared at the flame and said nothing. My mother Sarah tore a napkin down the center. She stacked forks in a cup and looked down. Sarah told the kids to stop running near fire. She did not ask Mark to drop the mic. She did not ask Jessica to step away. Mark tapped the cheap mic and loved the crackle. He said family nights beat any Miami weekend. He said loyalty matters when money turns serious. He said some people never learn simple lessons. He waited for me to cough or blink. I opened my phone and typed the line twice. I added the time and who laughed first. I wrote where Jessica stood and how close exactly. I saved the note and locked the screen. I pocketed the phone and kept watching. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. A friend slapped the table and spilled beer. The can rolled, tapped my shoe, then stopped. He said sorry without looking, then laughed again. Nobody asked if the joke had gone far. A man held up his phone between Mark and Jessica. He showed Jessica a meme and turned the screen. The caption said, "Upgrade complete," with a wink. Jessica covered her mouth and laughed toward Mark. Mark leaned closer and laughed into the phone. I took a napkin and wrote 2 words. Bar. Laughing. I underlined and wrote the date. Grease bled through and smudged the second line. I folded the napkin and slid it away. I kept the plate with ketchup marks nearby. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did they notice? Never. Did they care? Never. I kept my hands still and counted breaths. I kept my eyes on the plastic table. I kept my place like other family nights. Their cheers will choke tomorrow. Kids lined up on the steps with glow sticks. They copied the adults and whispered my name. They asked where my wife was, then giggled. They pointed at Jessica standing near Mark's shoulder. They looked at Mark first and not me. A boy grabbed my plate and walked off quickly. His mother said he needed food before fireworks. Nobody offered me another plate after that. I waited for someone to notice or help. No one noticed. No one helped. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Long enough for the back gate to rattle. Long enough for the neighbor's dog to bark. Long enough for kids to chant the line. Nobody told them to knock it off. Mark called me by the nickname from middle school. He stretched it out and waited for response. He stared. He stared longer. He didn't blink. "Gonna say something, John?" Mark finally asked. He smiled because he knew I wouldn't. I wrote the nickname on the back of receipt. It was a 7-Eleven receipt from last night. I circled the word and the time twice. I tucked the receipt under the folded plates. I pressed down until the stack sat flat. They filmed. They zoomed in. They kept filming. Aunt Linda told me to smile for family. Uncle Dan said a joke never hurt anybody. Neighbor Mike asked about the club on Washington. Mark answered fast and filled the silence. My father David checked the propane and shifted stance. Say something, this is your son, the voice repeated. David pulled the door and slipped into the kitchen. The yard stuttered, then pushed the noise higher. They turned back to Mark and waited for more. I set the mic on the cooler and stepped back. Mark picked it up and told me to help. He wanted more hot dogs and toasted buns. He liked giving orders when people were watching. He liked how the crowd followed his eyes. I moved buns from bag to tray without talking. I turned hot dogs once and heard grease pop. A drop hit my wrist and I wiped it. Handle simple grilling, John? Mark asked, laughing. People laughed with him and watched Jessica smile. No answer. No help. No shame. I put a hot dog on Mark's plate slowly. He told me to add relish and more mustard. He held the plate near his chest and grinned. Jessica stood beside him and nodded at everything. A Ford F-150 sat parked near the curb. Its headlights caught the kids chasing glow sticks. The truck stayed quiet, like me, all evening. I took another paper plate and wrote 3 names. I wrote who filmed, who shouted, who whistled loudest. I wrote the time on the bag with marker. I wedged the bag under a wobbling table leg. I kept the notes dry and out of sight. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. They laughed for Mark and Jessica's smile. They laughed for themselves and their phones. Nobody stopped it. Nobody wanted to stop. The yard that laughed will fall quiet. Mark ended the toast and raised his glass higher. He told everyone to eat before the buns cooled. He told Jessica to set the playlist volume. Jessica nodded to Mark and walked with the phone. People watched her pass and followed her steps. The grill hissed when water hit the grates. The speaker popped once and the music returned. I stacked chairs near the fence and counted slowly. I put the mic in its cracked plastic case. I wrapped the cable until it sat straight. They thought the night belonged to them. It didn't. Next time, it won't be me in that corner. Morning started early, before the sun touched Biscayne Bay. The Ford F-150 waited by the curb, dusted with salt. A McDonald's bag slumped on the cooler from yesterday. The cup holders held straws and 3 old napkins. The street was quiet except for the garbage truck. Silence was the knife. US-1 crawled slow, and the lights held long. I kept the radio off and watched the lanes. My hands still smelled of grill grease and smoke. I counted deliveries on the phone and checked addresses. Nothing special. Just miles, doors, and short signatures. I pulled into 7-Eleven for coffee and gas. The pump clicked on and the fumes hung heavy. Inside, the cooler fan hummed under the counter. The hot case held 2 dry breakfast sandwiches. I grabbed one and a small black coffee. The cashier scanned both and watched the lottery screen. I slid my card and waited for the beep. Grease from deliveries still coated my hands when the card beeped red. The reader flashed a red block of text. Decline, it said, then gave a second beep. He stared. He stared longer. He didn't blink. The man behind me sighed and checked his Rolex. Someone whispered, "Again?" near the bottled water racks. The cashier asked if I had another card. I nodded once and tried the debit. Second beep. Another red message on the screen. He asked if I wanted to try cash. I counted bills and coins and came up short. I pushed back the sandwich and kept the coffee. The uniform shirt stuck to my back when they laughed. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. The boy laughed into his phone and kept recording. The lid popped and splashed on my fingers. I wiped them on a napkin and stepped aside. The cashier scanned the next customer without speaking. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did they notice? Never. Did they care? Never. I folded the receipt and wrote one word. Declined. then the time and store number. I circled the total and drew one line. I drove west toward the warehouses near Doral. Traffic bunched near a school and then cleared. The cab smelled like gasoline and burnt coffee. My phone buzzed with a new group message. Mark posted a flyer for the club tonight. He tagged family and wrote, "Jessica has the list." 3 thumbs up arrived fast, then a champagne emoji. Sarah replied with hearts and clapping hands. David stayed in the thread without saying anything. The flyer stayed pinned at the top. I backed into a loading zone behind a market. A manager signed for boxes and pushed the door. He handed me a free branded cap, slightly bent. "Take it," he said. "Last one from the stack." I read the stitching and kept a small breath. It was Mark's club logo, stitched across the front. The manager said he gets passes from Jessica now. He said she handles guest lists on weekends. He said she is quick with confirmations. I placed the cap in the truck and closed it. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. 2 stock boys repeated Jessica's name near the dock. They looked at me, then looked at each other. I loaded the empties and signed the copy. I wrote the time on the bottom corner. I ate the cold sandwich in the cab. Crumbs fell onto the seat and stuck there. I wiped them with the McDonald's bag carefully. I wrote, "Doc. Cap Jessica," on the bag. I folded the top and slid it under. Walmart sat bright off the highway around noon. I needed tape, batteries, and cheap work gloves. The self-checkout lanes blinked and beeped in rows. I scanned the tape and then the batteries. The machine asked for an associate to approve. The light above me pulsed yellow and kept pulsing. A line formed behind me and shifted slowly. A mother sighed and told her kid to wait. I swiped the card and waited for the beep. Another red message filled the self-checkout screen. "Payment declined," it said, and beeped again. An associate walked over and stared at the screen. She asked if I had a different card. I shook my head and tried the debit again. Same result, same red block of text. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. A man raised his eyebrows and checked my shoes. The boy laughed into his phone without stopping. Someone whispered. Again? Near the candy racks. The associate asked if I wanted to cancel. Was I ashamed? No. Was I tired? Yes. Was it new? No. Did it matter? Yes. I kept the strip receipt and wrote 2 notes. Declined. Then the lane number and associate name. I folded it into my wallet behind cash. I crossed to the fuel station after canceling. The pump clicked fast and then shut off twice. I tapped the nozzle and tried again slowly. The display climbed and the card held this time. I exhaled once and leaned on the bed. A Ford F-150 turned in across from me. The driver nodded and asked about the pumps. We stood quiet until the clicks finished both. He left without more words or questions. Just nods, short looks, and steady hands. Their cheers will choke tomorrow. I pushed through 3 more deliveries near Fligami. Stairs, tight corners, and signatures with shaky pens. A tenant tipped me with a broken keychain. He shrugged and said it was free anyway. I kept the pieces together in my pocket. The group chat buzzed while I drove east. Mark posted a sunset photo from the deck. Jessica stood beside him behind the velvet rope. David liked the photo with a wave emoji. Sarah asked about the guest list later. I kept the phone face down at the next light. The sun lowered and bounced off windshields. I rolled the windows and counted slow breaths. I kept my voice steady and stayed quiet. Silence kept the details straight and clean. I stopped by David's garage after the last delivery. The workbench smelled of oil, dust, and rubber. He sorted bolts into jars and wrote labels. He nodded once and did not raise eyes. He asked if Mark needed the folding tables. I said no and asked about the safe. David wiped his hands and rolled the rag. He changed the subject and asked about tires. He told me to check the spare again. He told me to park straight by the hedge. Someone outside said, Say something, David. Then silence. David kept sorting and never looked over. He reached for a jar and tightened the lid. He asked if I needed a funnel today. He moved the rag and stacked another tray. I wrote, "Garage. No questions," on a napkin. I slid the napkin under the visor flap. The truck smelled of gasoline and coffee together. The cooler fan still hummed under the counter. The McDonald's bag rustled gently near the cooler. The yard that laughed will fall quiet. I made one last stop at 7-Eleven again. 2 waters, a small coffee, and a lottery slip. The cashier was new and spoke 3 words. He bagged both and said have a night. He didn't ask for anything else today. I parked by the curb and checked the notes. Receipts, napkins, and the bag folded flat. Times, places, names, and short lines repeated. I kept them sorted and easy to reach. Nothing fancy. Just dates and simple words. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did they notice? Never. Did they care? Never. Did I forget? No. Did I forgive? No. I drove home slow and kept the lights low. I carried the bag inside and locked up. Sarah texted me about Sunday dinner plans. She wrote that Jessica would help Mark with setup. She wrote that David promised the folding chairs already. She wrote that I could bring ice if needed. I wrote ice, and closed the message quietly. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. In my head, the sounds replayed without gaps. Walmart beeps, cashier stares, and the Rolex sigh. Dock cap with the club logo stitching. Group chat claps and the flyer pinned. I wrote, Sunday. Ice only. On a plate. I drew a small square for the cooler. I added one last line under everything. Silence holds. Then I capped the pen. I slid the plate behind the others carefully. I kept the proof. They think silence means surrender. It doesn't. I found the manila envelope on Sarah's kitchen counter. Walmart bag sat beside it, half open and crinkled. The air smelled like bleach and yesterday's coffee. My mother Sarah wiped the sink and stayed quiet. She said the mail came early from the box. One day, their folder won't matter at all. Inside the envelope lay copies with blue sticky tabs. Property tax notices with my last name spelled wrong. A Wells Fargo letter with updated account authorizations. A notarized page with a shaky version of mine. The signature wasn't mine. The date still matched. I held the page and checked the initials carefully. Sarah kept wiping the counter in small circles. She didn't look up when I said the date. She didn't ask to see anything at all. She asked if I wanted more coffee instead. Mark's name sat on 3 lines like a stamp. Jessica's name sat on 2 lines near authorizations. David's initials appeared beside a witness field. I read the addresses and underlined 2 numbers. I made a small dot beside each mistaken letter. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. Aunt Linda said the county forms were confusing lately. Uncle Dan said signatures looked different under pressure. Cousin Pete said everyone uses autosign these days. Nobody asked why my name looked wrong 3 times. I wrote the time on a napkin very slowly. I wrote the page count and the letter codes. I wrote, "Copy, not original," in the corner. I folded the napkin and put it in wallet. Sarah put 2 plastic cups on the table. A minute later, David stepped in from the garage. He smelled like oil and old brake cleaner. He nodded once and grabbed the water pitcher. He filled a glass cup and handed it away. He pushed a plastic cup toward me without words. "Say something, David," someone said from the hallway. David set the pitcher down and tightened his jaw. He asked if I needed air for the tires. He changed the subject and checked his watch. He asked if Mark needed the folding cart. I slid the Wells Fargo letter back into place. I photographed each page and checked the angles. Sarah cleared her throat and said the roast cooled. She moved a cold plate toward me with ketchup. She gave Mark a warm plate with fresh rolls. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. Mark walked in and dropped keys on the counter. Jessica followed with a small smile and phone. She glanced at the papers and then at me. She asked Sarah about napkins and extra forks. Mark said the notarized page was routine updates. He said the club needed new signers on file. He said the land tax paperwork was just cleanup. He said the bank preferred family names together. He didn't ask whether the signature belonged to me. I kept my voice level and asked for copies. Mark laughed and said everything was already copies. He said originals stayed in a better place. He looked at David and raised both eyebrows. David looked away and opened the fridge door. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did they notice? Never. Did they care? Never. Did I read everything twice? Yes, every line. Did I miss a date? No, not one. I wrote each date on a folded receipt. Jessica scrolled and showed Sarah a message thread. She turned the phone and hid half the screen. I saw my name in a short gray bubble. I saw a reply with a thumbs-up icon. Jessica laughed once and locked the phone quickly. Kids ran through the kitchen and froze nearby. They looked at the papers and then at me. They asked why my name looked different here. They asked why Mark got the warm rolls. They asked where Jessica would sit tonight. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. One boy repeated Mark's favorite line from yesterday. Dead weight, he said, then looked at Mark. Another kid copied him and waited for laughs. Nobody told them to stop talking like that. I picked up the tax notice and read slowly. Parcel numbers matched a lot near the canals. Payment coupon listed David's mailing address clearly. A second page added Mark as a contact. My name appeared last with the wrong middle initial. Sarah stacked plastic plates beside the toaster carefully. She tore a paper towel along the dotted line. She didn't touch the envelope or the phone. She asked if anyone wanted more iced tea. She kept her eyes on the counter the whole time. The smirks will fade faster than their signatures. We moved to the dining room with plastic cutlery. A glass pitcher sat near Mark and Jessica's seats. 2 plastic cups waited at my end quietly. Cold chicken sat on my plate without steam. Warm bread basket stopped near Mark and stayed there. Aunt Linda said county clerks are slow this year. Uncle Dan said notaries make everyone sign quickly. Cousin Pete asked if I finally got a passport. He asked if I could sign without shaking. He laughed at his own line and sipped wine. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Jessica leaned toward Mark and whispered something short. Mark nodded and smoothed the envelope with his palm. He told Aunt Linda the new vendor needed checks. He said I could drop cash at the club. I wrote 3 words on the back of a coupon. Notary. Order. Sequence. Then circled the initials twice. I slid the coupon under my plate edge. The plastic fork bent when I cut the chicken. Nobody offered a better fork or another plate. David fetched a tool catalog from the garage. He dropped it near my seat without speaking. He pointed to a discount page for floor jacks. He said the sale ended Monday at noon. He didn't ask about the envelope at all. Sarah carried coffee mugs to Mark's side first. She placed a mug near Jessica with both hands. She placed a plastic cup near my setting again. She said they ran out of matching mugs? She didn't look at me when she said it. I asked Sarah if she remembered the old safe. She said David changed the garage shelves last year. She said the safe was heavy and hard. She said maybe Mark helped move it somewhere. She said we could check later if needed. Mark said the safe stored club receipts and menus. He said old family papers stayed at the bank. He said I should relax about little things. He said we had dessert, and then errands. He looked at Jessica and nodded toward the door. A kid grabbed my plastic fork without asking anything. He ran off to spear a piece of melon. Nobody gave me another fork after that. I lifted the chicken with a paper towel. I ate around bones and set it down. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. Pete snapped a picture of the table quietly. He framed my empty setting in the plastic cup. He sent it to the group thread without warning. My phone buzzed with the photo almost instantly. Was I embarrassed? No. Was I surprised? No. Had I seen it before? Many times already. I saved the photo and added one line. Plastic for me. Glass for them. Dated today. I filed it into the folder on my phone. One stamp will make their talking stop fast. Jessica reached for the envelope like it belonged there. She pressed the edges flat and tucked it close. Mark stacked the letters and smiled across the room. David cleared his throat and pushed back his chair. Someone said, "Say something, David." He said nothing. Sarah carried a tray of cookies and said nothing. She set it between Mark and Jessica carefully. She asked if anyone wanted coffee refills again. She avoided my side and checked the sink. The dishwasher hummed and filled the silence neatly. I gathered the stray papers left on the table. I wrote page numbers in pencil at the bottom. I noted the notary stamp numbers in order. I wrote witness lines and pointed to David's initials. I put everything back how I found it. They watched me work like it meant nothing here. They talked about bookings and new VIP signs. They talked about Jessica's plan for the door. They talked about bottle tears and late charges. They kept the conversation on the club only. Kids drifted back to the room and stood close. They looked at Jessica like she ran the house. They asked Mark about the party playlist tonight. They didn't ask me about anything at all. They held their phones and stayed near the cookies. I wrote one last note on a takeout sleeve. Order of signatures. Then the date and time. I folded the sleeve and slid it in wallet. I pushed my chair in and checked the counter. I left my plastic cup exactly where it sat. They smiled at the papers. I smiled at mine. Morning came slow, and I started with receipts again. The Ford F-150 sat straight by David's hedge. The McDonald's bag still rustled near the cooler. I spread last night's notes across the dashboard carefully. Dates, locations, initials, and short lines repeated. The garage door will open for me. US-1 moved steady while I planned simple stops. I needed copies, envelopes, and a small notebook. I needed a key or a simple code. I kept the list short and checked the times. No calls from Mark or Jessica this morning. I parked behind the 7-Eleven by the alley. The cooler fan hummed under the counter quietly. I bought 2 coffees and a pack of pens. The cashier bagged them and looked past me. He didn't ask about anything else today. Walmart sat bright off the highway before noon. I used the self-service copier near the cards. I copied the Wells Fargo letter twice in grayscale. I copied the property pages and wrote page numbers. The machine squeaked and pushed warm sheets slowly. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. 2 teens watched the pages and filmed the tray. A woman looked at the forms and smirked. Nobody asked why my name looked wrong. Nobody asked if I needed help copying. I bought a binder and 3 clear sleeves. I kept the originals inside a sealed envelope. I wrote, "Bank Tax Notary," on the tab. I dated the spine with a fat marker. I paid cash and kept the receipt straight. Was I worried? No. Was I focused? Yes. Did I forget anything? No. Not today. I drove to David's garage before dinner time. The workbench smelled like oil and old rubber. A box fan pushed warm air toward the door. David sorted bolts into jars without raising eyes. He said nothing about yesterday or the forms. He asked if Mark needed the folding cart. He asked if Jessica confirmed the head count. He did not ask about me at all. I asked David about the old safe again. He said the safe stayed where it always stayed. He wiped his hands and changed the subject. He asked if my tires looked worn inside. He reached for a gauge and avoided my face. I moved the tarp near the back wall. Behind the shop press stood a short iron safe. Paint flaked off the edges in small curls. The dial turned rough, then clicked 6 times quietly. The handle didn't move with normal pressure. I checked the shelf above the safe for clues. Old envelopes held manuals and dry registration slips. One envelope read, "Land deeds 2001 and later." Another said, "Trust copies, keep for tax seasons." A third said, "Beneficiary letters, private." In pencil. I wrote the labels on a clean index card. I wrote, "Safe behind press," and the time. I traced the dial numbers where my hand slipped. I folded the card and slid it into wallet. I took 3 photos with flash turned low. Sarah called from the door with a small voice. Dinner was ready, and Mark already arrived. Jessica stood behind Sarah holding a bakery box. They waited for me to close the garage. David kept wiping the wrench with the same rag. We sat at the table with plastic cutlery. A glass pitcher stood between Mark and Jessica. 2 plastic cups waited near my setting again. Sarah placed warm chicken on Mark's plate first. She placed cold chicken on mine without words. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. Cousin Pete clicked his phone under the table. Uncle Dan whispered something about signatures again. Aunt Linda washed my cup and looked away. Nobody asked if I wanted anything warmer. Mark said the notary would visit the club tomorrow. Mark said a few papers needed simple initials. Mark said Jessica would coordinate the timing tonight. Jessica smiled and tapped her phone twice. Jessica said the folder lived in her car. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did David defend me? No. Not once. Did Sarah stop the plan? No. She didn't. She asked if anyone wanted more warm rolls. She nudged the basket toward Mark and Jessica. I wrote 3 words on a paper plate. Warm there. Cold here. Then today's date. I drew a small arrow toward Mark's basket. I slid the plate under my chair carefully. I kept my voice low and steady. One signature will finish their talking for good. David stood to grab a catalog from the garage. Someone said, "Say something, David." He said nothing. He returned with coupons for floor jacks. He talked about ton ratings and safety pins. He never looked at the envelope on the counter. Jessica opened her bakery box and smiled wider. She served Mark the first slice with extra frosting. She offered Sarah the second and a clean fork. She placed a plastic fork near my plate. It bent when I tried the crust. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Pete whispered, "Careful, plastic breaks under pressure." He looked at Mark and waited for approval. Mark smiled and asked about weekend bookings. Jessica listed names and paused on 3. I checked the clock on the stove twice. I wrote the time on a folded receipt. Dinner. Cold plate. Plastic fork. I added quickly. I circled David's initials on the copied page. I kept the receipt flat inside my wallet. Sarah asked if anyone wanted coffee or tea. She placed a mug near Jessica with both hands. She placed another mug near Mark and smiled. She set a plastic cup at my seat again. She said the dishwasher was already running full. Was I surprised? No. Had I expected different? No. Did it help me focus? Yes. Every time. I looked at Mark's folder near the salt. A blue tab stuck out with vendors, handwritten. Another tab read, "Lan," printed in bold font. I excused myself and walked to the garage. I took the index card from my wallet. I tried the dial using birthdays and anniversaries. I tried David's service year and the club opening. The handle shifted slightly, then locked hard again. I knelt and checked under the press base. A small magnet held a taped brass key. The key fit a side panel and clicked. A thin plate swung open and showed nothing. Only dust, a spider, and a small pencil. I wrote, "Magnet key, side plate, no luck." I added the time and the garage temperature. The box fan pushed warmer air by my shoulder. I looked back at the house and listened. Voices carried, but words broke at the door. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. Jessica said the notary liked quick signatures tonight. Mark said tomorrow's schedule was already tight. Sarah said dessert plates needed rinsing now. David asked about the lawnmower spark plug. I slipped the index card behind the license forms. I returned to the table and took my seat. Jessica closed her folder and held the box. Mark tapped his glass and thanked everyone quietly. He said family made business clean and strong. I set my plastic cup beside Sarah's dish towel. I wrote, "Notary tomorrow," on a napkin corner. I wrote, "Folder in car," and circled it. I folded the napkin and slid it inside sleeve. I sealed the sleeve with one strip of tape. David stacked plates and avoided my eyes again. He asked if I could help with the shed. He changed the subject without taking a breath. He said the hedge needed trimming this weekend. He said the trimmer cord jammed last month. I asked David where he kept the safe code. He said the code lived where codes usually live. He said he would remember it when needed. He said not to worry about steel boxes. He stared at the floor and tightened his jaw. Sarah wiped the counter and tore another towel. She asked Jessica about the playlist volume last night. She asked Mark about the beach parking rules. She asked me nothing and kept folding towels. Her hands moved faster than her words did. I gathered the extra pages left on the table. I wrote, "Witness lines wrong sequence," on the margin. I noted 2 dates that didn't match statements. I wrote, "David initials here, not here." I placed everything back how I found it. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. Pete asked if I needed a pen tutorial. Uncle Dan laughed and asked about my glasses. Aunt Linda asked if plastic cups bothered me. Nobody waited for my answer at all. I carried my notes to the truck calmly. I slid the binder behind the seat carefully. I put the McDonald's bag on top again. I wrote, "Safe confirmed," on a paper plate. I drew the dial and marked 6 clicks. Was I done? No. Was I close? Closer. Did I have enough yet? Not yet. I locked the truck and checked the garage. I turned the dial once more and listened. The safe stayed shut for tonight at least. Their folder won't matter when mine opens. I went back inside for final dishes. Sarah handed Mark warm leftovers wrapped in foil. She handed me a cold plate covered with plastic. She said the microwave was busy with vegetables. She smiled once and went to the sink. Jessica hugged Sarah and thanked her for dinner. Jessica stood beside Mark near the hallway doorway. Mark asked David about pickup times tomorrow afternoon. David said the cart would be ready early. David said nothing about the safe again. I wrote a last line on a clean plate. Folder car. Notary tomorrow. Safe behind press. I dated it and slid it into the bag. I zipped the bag and checked the time. I nodded to everyone and stepped toward the door. They think tonight ended clean. Her folder won't save her next time. Christmas lights blinked across David's yard that night. Plastic tables stretched long with paper cloth taped down. Folding chairs bent under guests holding red plates. Hot trays steamed near Mark and Jessica's seats. Cold dishes waited near mine without steam. Smiles cracked faster than glass. The kids wore Santa hats from Walmart bins. They carried glow sticks and shouted my name. They asked where Jessica would sit this year. They didn't ask me anything else. They followed Mark around and waited for laughs. Jessica stood close beside Mark holding a glass. She wore a red dress and leaned on him. She laughed at his jokes without looking at me. People asked Jessica about bookings for New Year's. They asked about bottle service and parking passes. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Uncle Dan repeated Mark's joke for those arriving late. Aunt Linda clapped too hard near the tray. Cousin Pete filmed with his phone pointing at me. Nobody told him to put the phone away. I sat with a cold roll on my plate. Sarah passed warm bread to Mark's side instead. She said nothing to me, not one word. She stacked glass tumblers for Mark and Jessica. She gave me another plastic cup without comment. "Say something, David," someone near the grill whispered. David scraped ash into a tray and looked down. He changed the subject and asked about propane. He asked about spark plugs and fuel lines. He never said a word about me. Mark tapped his glass and lifted the microphone. The crowd hushed and turned toward the speakers. Jessica smiled wide and leaned against his arm. Mark cleared his throat and paused for effect. He looked at me before he spoke. "Another year, another lesson," Mark said, grinning wide. "Some family carry the weight, some don't. Some build the future, some sit back." He looked around like waiting for applause. Jessica clapped first, and the rest followed. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. "Same joke every year," someone muttered near the back. A boy laughed into his phone without stopping. Another guest shrugged and kept recording anyway. Nobody told them to cut it out. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did they notice? Never. Did they care? Never. Did I record it? Yes. Every single word. I wrote, "Christmas toast." Dead weight again. I circled the phrase twice and folded the napkin. "Their cheers will choke tomorrow." Sarah carried warm ham slices to Mark first. She gave Jessica a full plate with sides. She slid a cold plate toward me late. The gravy congealed and stuck to the fork. She walked away before I said anything. Cousin Pete raised his phone and laughed again. He zoomed in on my cold plate slowly. He sent the picture straight to the group chat. My phone buzzed with the image seconds later. Nobody stopped him, nobody said a word. Mark spoke into the microphone again. He said loyalty matters when money gets real. He said some family deserve to stand near. He said some belong outside looking in. Jessica laughed once more at the perfect time. I wrote on a paper plate by my hand. "Ham cold. Plate late." Jessica clapping. I underlined Jessica's name 3 times. I folded the plate and slid it under. I stacked the cold roll on top quietly. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Even neighbors peeking over fences joined the noise. A car slowed on the street to listen. The sound carried beyond the gate and trees. Nobody lowered their voices at all. David walked by carrying the carving knife. He placed it near Mark with steady hands. He told Mark the slices looked perfect. He looked at me once, then looked away. He said nothing, not one word. Aunt Linda handed Mark a gift in silver wrap. She handed Jessica another, smaller gold box. She handed me a bag with cheap socks. She said Walmart had discounts after Black Friday. She smiled and walked back to the chairs. The pie came from Publix, still in the box. Jessica cut slices and handed them with forks. She gave Mark the centerpiece with extra crust. She gave me the corner with broken edges. Nobody asked if I wanted something else. Was I surprised? No. Did I keep it? Yes. Did I write it down? Yes, on receipt. I wrote, "Socks. Walmart bag." I circled the total and folded it tight. I slid it into the binder behind my chair. The yard that laughed will fall quiet. Mark raised his glass again and waited for silence. Jessica leaned closer and adjusted the microphone cord. Mark said next year would be even bigger. He said new contracts doubled their profits already. He said loyalty always wins in the end. The crowd clapped hard and shouted together. They raised cans and glasses and phones. They looked at Mark like he owned everything. They looked at Jessica like she ruled with him. They looked at me like I wasn't there. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. A boy asked if I even had a job. Another kid said Jessica was the real host. They laughed at their own lines and clapped. Nobody corrected them, not even Sarah. Sarah tore a napkin into small strips. She stacked forks in a cup near Jessica. She asked if anyone wanted pie now. She looked at me once, then looked away. She moved to the sink without speaking. I wrote the time on a napkin edge. I wrote, "Microphone. Toast." Jessica clapping first. I folded the napkin and slid it deep. I placed it under the socks bag. I tapped the stack flat and silent. David adjusted the speaker volume with both hands. He told Mark it sounded sharp and clear. He told Jessica the mic carried strong outside. He told me nothing, not a word. He walked away before I spoke. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Loud enough for the back gate to shake. Loud enough for the neighbor's dog to bark. Loud enough for kids to chant in rhythm. Nobody told them to quiet down. Was I finished? No. Was I recording? Yes. Every plate, every note, every cold dish. Every laugh, every photo, every smirk. Every silence from David and Sarah. I had it all, saved and dated. Mark lifted the mic for one last toast. He thanked Jessica for her loyalty first. He thanked Sarah for the dinner second. He thanked David for steady hands on the grill. He didn't thank me at all. They thought it was just another holiday. The microphone was never theirs. The morning after Christmas I drove downtown early. The Wells Fargo branch opened at 9 sharp. I sat in the Ford F-150 with papers. The binder rested heavy on the seat beside me. Every note, every plate, every receipt was inside. Their folder won't matter when mine opens. The banker's name tag read, Emily, Senior Accounts. She greeted me without looking past the screen. I slid the envelope across the polished desk. She pulled on gloves and checked every signature slowly. Her eyebrows lifted when she reached the initials. Mr. John, these don't match your records, Emily said. She pointed to Mark's name on the line. She asked if I authorized Jessica anywhere. I shook my head and gave her copies. She made 3 scans and pressed a button. The printer hummed. The copier light blinked fast. Emily said fraud holds could trigger this week. She said a lawyer should handle the trust. She said David's witness line would be questioned. She said originals were safe in her system. They smirked. They smirked again. Louder this time. That's what I remembered from the last dinner. But today the banker didn't smirk at all. Today the banker put a red tag. She stapled, investigate, across the top. I wrote the date on a receipt stub. Bank hold triggered. Fraud line. Jessica unauthorized. I underlined fraud 3 times. I folded the stub and tucked it back. I walked out steady and clear. By evening, David's backyard filled again with lights. Sarah served warm food to Mark first again. She gave Jessica the second full plate. She slid mine late, half cold, half empty. She didn't look at me while she did it. Smiles crack faster than glass. Mark raised his glass and tapped the microphone. He said family meant loyalty above all things. He said signatures prove who really belongs here. He looked straight at me while saying it. Jessica laughed and clapped right beside him. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. Cousin Pete filmed with his phone under the light. Uncle Dan whispered, "Dead weight never learns, huh?" Aunt Linda poured wine and smiled near Jessica. Nobody stopped them, nobody said a word. Was I angry? Yes. Did I show it? No. Did I have enough saved? Almost, nearly complete. Did they think silence meant weakness? Always, every time. They were wrong. Completely wrong. I kept writing, steady hand, no shake. I took a napkin and wrote, "Bank hold." I added, "Fraud flagged." Signatures. I wrote, "Emily, Wells Fargo," and circled her name. I folded the napkin and slipped it in binder. I kept my place and said nothing. Mark tried another joke about plastic cups. Jessica clapped again, but her eyes shifted quick. She glanced at me and then at the folder. Her hand trembled slightly on her glass rim. She didn't laugh as loud this time. David refilled the propane tank at the grill. Someone whispered, "Say something, David." He stayed silent. He wiped grease on his jeans and looked away. He asked about spark plugs again. He never looked at the binder once. Sarah tore a napkin and stacked forks carefully. She asked Jessica if pie came from Publix. She asked Mark about New Year's bookings again. She asked me nothing. She kept her head low and quiet. They whispered. They whispered again. Louder this time. Why is he always writing plates? A kid said. Another copied and scribbled fake notes on a napkin. They giggled and showed Jessica their pretend list. Jessica smiled faintly but didn't play along. I wrote on my plate. Kids mocking notes. I underlined mocking twice and dated it. I stacked the plate under the others. I pressed them flat beneath the cooler bag. I didn't lift my head once. Mark cleared his throat and tapped the mic again. He said family records don't lie. He said fathers know who built this yard. He said brothers sometimes forget their place. He smirked straight into the phone cameras. I opened my wallet and slid a receipt. I wrote, Mike joke. Fraud. Bank ready. I folded it once and slid it back. I didn't raise my eyes to Mark. I didn't need to anymore. Tomorrow their cheers will choke inside these walls. Jessica leaned closer to Mark, but her hand shook. She looked at David like waiting for defense. David pretended with propane, eyes down always. Sarah White counters harder and faster. Nobody said a word for me. They laughed. They laughed again. Louder this time. But some claps faded quicker than before. Some eyes turned toward me, just a second. Someone whispered, He doesn't even blink anymore. Another said, He writes everything every time. Was I ready? Yes. Completely ready. Did they know? Not a chance. They thought it was still a game. They thought I'd take every cold plate. They thought silence meant surrender. I stacked notes, receipts, and folded plates. Every laugh, every smirk, every silence saved. Every wrong fork, every plastic cup, every cold dish. Every witness line, every forged name. All of it sealed and dated. They thought tonight was like the others. Tomorrow they'll walk in smiling. Tomorrow they'll walk out served. Morning broke slow over downtown Miami's gray buildings. I parked the Ford F-150 near the courthouse steps. The binder sat heavy beside a sealed envelope. Plates, receipts, photos, and copies filled every sleeve. I carried the McDonald's bag folded perfectly flat. The judge will read my name clearly today. Security checked the binder and waved me through. The hallway smelled like toner and old carpet. A vending machine hummed near the water fountain. I took a paper cup and drank slowly. Others had bottles and stainless tumblers from home. Emily from Wells Fargo met me by elevators. She wore a navy blazer and held a folder. She said fraud holds were finalized this morning. She said the notary was listed under review. She said account control would follow the trust. We rode up with a bailiff and 2 clerks. They spoke softly and avoided everyone's eyes. The door labeled probate stood open a sliver. I breathed once and checked the receipts again. Dates, initials, balances, and the red stamp. Mark arrived with Jessica 5 minutes before roll call. Mark's smile aimed heavy toward my side. Jessica carried a blue folder against her chest. She didn't look at me, not this time. David and Sarah walked behind them without talking. They whispered. They whispered again. Softer this time. A cousin waved from the benches without standing. Uncle Dan coughed and stared at the floor. Aunt Linda looked past me toward the clerk. Nobody laughed, not even once. Was I angry? No. I was ready. Was I alone? No. Emily stood steady. Did I need to speak loud? Not today. Did I bring everything? Yes. Every single piece. I kept my hands still the whole time. The judge entered and called our case number. We stood, then sat when the bailiff nodded. Emily introduced herself for the bank records. I gave my name and spelled it slowly. The judge wrote it and looked at Mark. Mark smiled like it still worked here. He said updates were routine and harmless paperwork. He said signatures were valid under family agreements. He said the club needed quick changes last month. He spoke like the room belonged to him. Jessica kept the blue folder tight against her. Her eyes moved fast between the tables. She whispered once to Mark and then stopped. Her hand shook when she set the folder down. She took it back and held it close. Emily handed copies to the clerk and judge. She pointed to the account authorization changes first. She showed the mismatch in my recorded signature. She showed the witness line stamped with David's initials. She read the bank note about temporary holds. They smirked. They smirked again. Not this time. No one smirked in that quiet room. Pens clicked and pages slid across smooth wood. The judge read each page with moving lips. Silence filled the space between each line. I slid the envelope onto the table carefully. I opened it and set 3 items down: Wells Fargo letterheads, property pages, and notary logs. I added photos from Sarah's counter last week. I added 2 paper plates with written times. The judge looked at the plates and paused. "Explain the plates," she said without any expression. I said I wrote words where they humiliated me. I said I recorded dates, names, and exact lines. I said everything matched the phone notes and receipts. The clerk compared the plates to the phone photos. He nodded once and marked the plate corners. He wrote the timestamps inside his case log. He slid each piece into a clear sleeve. He handed one to the judge to read. David sat stiff near the back row. Someone whispered, "Say something, David." He stayed silent. He folded his hands and checked his shoes. He stared at the clock mounted on wood. He never lifted his eyes toward the bench. Sarah held her purse and stared at nothing. She tore a tissue into straight thin strips. She didn't look at me or anyone. Her lips moved once without sound forming. She stayed still with the tissue confetti. The judge asked about the garage safe. I named the location behind David's shop press. I handed photos of the safe and labels. I described the taped brass key inside plate. I said the code was unknown to me. The judge asked David about the safe details. David cleared his throat and said it existed. He said it stored family records and tools. He said codes were private and always guarded. He said nothing about contents or access lists. The judge ordered a neutral officer to open it. Emily confirmed bank counsel would attend the opening. The bailiff set a date on the record. I wrote the date on a paper plate. I underlined "safe opening" and circled the time. The deed will end their talking today. We broke for lunch in the ground floor cafeteria. The line shuffled slow past the soup station. I bought a cold sandwich and black coffee. The cashier gave me a flimsy plastic fork. Mark received metal cutlery with his hot plate. They whispered. They whispered again. Quieter this time. Jessica stood apart near the window with water. She watched my table and then looked away. Sarah sat with Aunt Linda near the door. David pretended to read a maintenance notice. Was I bothered? No. Not anymore. Was I writing? Yes. Through the whole break. I listed cafeteria plastic on a napkin. I wrote, Mark hot lunch. Mine cold. I dated it and folded it once. Back upstairs, the hearing went fast again. The judge asked for any further submissions. I handed a flash drive with scanned copies. I handed a printed index for quick lookup. Emily added the bank's fraud hold notice. Mark tried a smile that faltered halfway. He said the family meant no real harm. He said it was efficiency, not deception here. The judge asked why my name was misspelled. Mark said the county clerk was under pressure. Jessica finally opened her blue folder slowly. She slid a stack toward the clerk's tray. She said these were cleaned copies from home. The judge asked who prepared them last night. Jessica said she organized, Mark reviewed, David witnessed. Emily compared those copies to the bank records. She pointed to 3 date mismatches line by line. She showed printed times overlapping 2 closed hours. She showed a notary seal with wrong county number. The room stayed quiet while she waited. The judge asked if anyone disputed those mismatches. Mark shook his head and stared at nothing. Jessica pressed her palms flat against the table. David rubbed his thumb along his wrist bone. Sarah looked down and kept tearing tissue. We reconvened 3 days later for the safe. The garage door opened to the noon heat. A neutral locksmith turned the dial with slow clicks. David watched from the workbench without speaking. Sarah stood behind the door with her purse. The handle moved and the safe opened. Inside lay folders labeled by decade and year. Land deeds, trust certificates, beneficiary updates, account letters. A sealed envelope sat under a rubber band. Last instructions, written in David's old ink. They whispered. They whispered again. Quieter than ever. The officer photographed each folder before touching anything. Emily logged the order while I noted times. Jessica stepped back and grabbed Mark's sleeve. Mark's jaw moved without sound or words. The officer broke the seal and read first lines. The trust named me primary beneficiary for land. The accounts moved under my sole control upon confirmation. The club shares transferred on David's written death. Mark's name appeared only on a separate note. The note said Mark held temporary operating duties. It ended upon proof of my full capacity. It listed an auditor and an attorney phone. It listed penalties for unauthorized signature changes. It named Sarah as witness for the instructions. Was I surprised? No. I was prepared. Were they shocked? Yes. Each face showed it. Did David speak? No. Not a word. He placed both hands flat on the bench. He kept looking at the floor knots. Sarah wiped her eyes and whispered my name. She said she didn't know everything exactly. She said things moved fast with Mark lately. She didn't explain the warm plates or mugs. She didn't explain the silence at the grill. We returned to court with the safe contents. The judge took the sealed envelope copy. She read the last instructions into the record. She ordered control of accounts to be transferred. She ordered a hold on the club revenues. Emily signed the transfer papers beside the clerk. I initialed where the yellow tabs pointed. My name appeared spelled right every single time. The judge looked up and nodded once slowly. Her pen tapped the block and stopped tapping. Mark stared at the table and then ceiling. His smirk drained off and never returned again. Jessica folded her folder and closed both hands. She didn't meet my eyes for the decision. Her shoulders dropped when the order was spoken. David kept quiet and asked nothing afterwards. Sarah stood and touched the bench with fingertips. No one laughed, not anywhere in that room. The bailiff handed certified copies to Emily. The clerk stamped everything with the date. I wrote one last note on a paper plate. Court order. Transfers complete. Safe confirmed. I drew 3 boxes and checked each one. I wrote the judge's name with careful letters. I slid the plate into the binder's final sleeve. They will leave this building quiet and empty. Children waited with Aunt Linda near the elevator. They didn't chant or whisper this time. One boy asked if I needed help. Another held the door and waited patiently. They looked at me like something changed. Was I angry? No. Not anymore. Was I finished? Yes. Completely finished here. Did I remember every joke and plate? Yes. Every roll, every cup, every cold slice. Every word written and dated in order. The judge finalized the orders with 2 signatures. The bank confirmed transfers by email and printout. The clerk handed me copies in a folder. This folder felt lighter than all the others. It held weight only in names and lines. We stepped into the hallway filled with echo. Mark walked ahead and didn't turn around. Jessica kept her eyes down and held the rail. David adjusted his cap and left first. Sarah looked back once and then away. They whispered. They whispered again. Then nothing. No jokes. No filming. No clapping anywhere. Just doors, footsteps, and a tired elevator bell. Just the sound of paper sliding in bags. Just the quiet that follows real decisions. I carried the binder to the truck bed. I placed the McDonald's bag under it carefully. I set the last plate on top and pressed. I locked the toolbox and checked the cab. Everything sat where I needed it now. We drove back to David's yard that afternoon. The lights from Christmas still hung crookedly. Chairs leaned against the fence in tired rows. No one reached for a microphone or glass. No one raised a joke into the air. Kids watched me carry the folder inside. They moved aside and cleared a straight path. They didn't say, "Dead weight," anymore at all. They said, "Sir," and held the screen door. They asked if I needed help with boxes. Was there food? Yes. Cold from the fridge. Was there a cup? Plastic from the stack. I kept it anyway and filled it once. I set it next to the final folder. I wrote, "All done," on the rim with pen. The bank email buzzed my phone with confirmations. Account shifts, card cancellations, and fraud holds listed. The club shares updated under the trust terms. Mark's access paused pending auditor appointment. Jessica's authorizations removed from all files. David sat by the garage door and stared. Sarah stood near the sink and folded towels. She looked at me and opened her mouth. Then closed it and wiped the counter slowly. Neither of them tried another word tonight. They thought I was nothing. Now they have nothing. Hey friend, subscribe. For you it's a second. For me, a big deal. Drop a comment with your city or country.